Good evening, everybody. My name is Wayne Ranney, and I serve on the board of directors for the Grand Canyon Historical Society. And we welcome you to tonight's virtual outing. The Grand Canyon Historical Society, our mission is to celebrate and promote the study and preservation of the Grand Canyon region's cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of its members and the public. And just last year in 2024, we celebrated 40 years of existence when the society was started by some pioneer members of Grand Canyon Village. We encourage you to become a member. Our dues are only $35 a year. We are an all-volunteer organization, and we're hopeful that many of you can join us so that we can continue to expand all of our activities like these virtual outings and in-person outings and our tri-annual history symposiums. If you do become a member, you'll get 4 issues in the calendar year of the Old Pioneer magazine, which has a lot of history articles about the Grand Canyon and the Grand Canyon region. So we do these virtual outings. We conduct tours at the South and North Rim, and you can find it on our website. Our website is very easy, grandcanyonhistory.org.
Kern is a retired chemical pathologist, formerly with the University of Utah Department of Pathology in Salt Lake City. He also worked for a short time as a medical biochemist at Women's and Children's Hospital in Vancouver, British Columbia. He later worked as a private consultant in laboratory medicine in Bellingham, Washington, and earned his PhD in chemistry, right, at the University of New Mexico before going to medical school in Albuquerque. And in Albuquerque is where he met Cindy Stafford, his wife.
Most of you know where the cemetery at South Rim is. If you don't, it's by Shrine of the Ages in the park headquarters. There's a nice parking lot, very convenient to the cemetery. And this is about a mile east of Grand Canyon Village. Here's the cemetery gate, the entryway. But before I go charging through this gate, I'm going to take a little detour. And I'm going to suggest to you, there didn't really need to be a cemetery at the South Rim. And I'm going to start by showing you a couple of death certificates. I just love death certificates. You can download all these death certificates on genealogy.az.gov, all on your own if you want. The fact of the matter is, in the state of Arizona, all death certificates become public information 50 years after the person's death. And so let's look at Bessie Moon's death certificate right here. You can see her name there right towards the top. And you can see up on the left that she died at the Grand Canyon. And she lived at the canyon for 2.5 years. And she died in 1909. She died of pulmonary tuberculosis, kind of a common disease at the time. And she was buried in Wilmington, Ohio. Well, if you go down the line, you can see the undertaker was in Williams. So her body was probably transported by a train to Williams, embalmed, and then it could have been sent anywhere across the country. And the fact is that transporting bodies at this time by rail was very common. You just did not have to have a cemetery at the South Rim. I'll tell you why we have one in a couple of minutes, but that's we'll get to that. Now, I have occasionally been accused of being too fond of death certificates in cemeteries, and there's a reason I really like things like this death certificate to get into the local history. When I found this certificate for Bessie Moon and saw that she had lived at the Grand Canyon for 2.5 years, I thought, gee, what was she doing there? What was going on? And when I did a little investigating, this is what came up. Her husband, Carl Moon, who I'd never heard of, was actually the photographer for Fred Harvey at El Tovar. And he came as a complete shock to me. The fact is, Carl Moon in 1910, when this little monograph came out, was far more popular than the Colt brothers. And this is the sort of history that's been lost, at least to people like me, perhaps some of the rest of you who've heard of Carl Moon. And he's well worth learning about. I'm not going to talk about him anymore, but that's why I like these cemeteries and these death certificates, is because it reveals some very interesting history. So this is an early map of the cemetery. I'm going to kind of structure my entire talk on this map. So it's a little busy at this magnification. So I'm going to break it into pieces. And the first thing I'm going to do is look at that informational rectangle up on the left. And you can see it here. And look down in the lower right corner, you can see this map was drawn in 1923 by M.R. Tillotson. So he was the park engineer, came along in 1922, and in 1923 he drew this very nice map. And it has a couple of very interesting features. Concentrate initially on that yellow line. That represents the early cemetery fence. We don't know when that fence was put up, sometime between 1919 and 1923. And we're not certain exactly who put it up, but someone in the Park Service. It has a very curious feature, namely, look up in the upper right up here, it left some graves outside the cemetery fence. Well, those are Hispanic graves. And the message is pretty clear. It's wise to remember that in the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan was undergoing a resurgence all across the country. There actually was a Klan chapter at the Grand Canyon. We don't know much about it. I think many times these sorts of stories have been covered up or lost. But for example, we think that Martin Buglin probably was the Grand Wizard Poobah, although that's based on a single document, and the evidence is not conclusive. But at any rate, there were white supremacist attitudes at the Grand Canyon, both in the community and in the Park Service. Well, Tillotson came along in 1923. He looked at the cemetery, and you can kind of see what he was thinking. He was thinking, we got to do a better job with the cemetery. And he proposed expanding the boundaries of the cemetery and the fence to include all the graves in this area, kind of a novel idea. And then giving some structure to the cemetery with some paths and numbering everything. Like that big one in the center, that represents the pioneer section in this early map. And section 2 represents the Masonic section. Of course, Tillotson himself was a Mason. He wanted to make certain there was a Masonic section. And section 3 was going to be the Catholic section, 4 was a general section, and then 5 was the veterans section. So I'm going to expand the upper portion of this map in the next slide right here, so you can see things a little bit better. And let's zoom in here on Lorenzo Ramirez on the upper right. And we have a death certificate for Lorenzo. So we know a little bit about him. We know the day he died, where he was buried, and he really represents the first person buried in the cemetery that's well documented. We know the location and the date. And before that time, we're uncertain of one or the other. Now, look at right above Lorenzo at Lucia, Lucia Marquez. All we have for her is a name. There's no death certificate. As a matter of fact, if you look at the modern map of the cemetery that shows where everyone is buried, Lucia isn't even listed. That her grave, the fact that she is even buried here, has been lost. And then look to the left of Lucia at that cross, and here's even less information. We just know someone was buried there. We don't even have a name. So as early as 1923, and then if you look around the map and count those unnamed crosses, you'll see that there are 8 of them. So even as early as 1923, there's this huge gap about what we don't know that happened in the early days of the cemetery. Now let's go look at Lorenzo's death certificate, one of my favorites here. So his name, Lorenzo Ramirez. You can see he died in 1918, and he died of influenza and pneumonia. And if you look down a little lower, you can see he was sick for 7 days before he died. And then look up here. He died at 4:15 p.m. in the afternoon, so late in the afternoon. Well, look down on the lower left, date of burial. This guy was buried the same day that he died. He dies late in the afternoon, close to sunset in October, and he's buried the same day. What's going on here? Well, the fact of the matter is that the Spanish flu had hit Coconino County and northern Arizona in early October. A lot of people got sick. Emergency hospitals were opening in Flagstaff and in Williams. The medical community was completely overwhelmed. There was an early thought that if you buried someone on the day they died, then they wouldn't infect anyone else. And so we know now it didn't make much difference, but that was the idea at the time. So there was a big rush to get Lorenzo into the ground. And then look up here, midway on the left, you can see he worked for the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, as many in the Hispanic community did. And in that line above him, there it says something boss. I can't tell what that's, trail boss or crew boss. If anyone can decipher that first word, I'd like to know what it is. But so he had some sort of supervisory position. Let's move on to another death certificate. This is a related one for Lorito Ramirez, Lorenzo's daughter. You can see Lorenzo here, kind of a funny spelling of his name, but Lorenzo Ramirez, the father, and a little further down, Christina, the mother. Lorito died when she was about a year old, just a couple days older. And it's good to remember that in 1916, an infant in the first year of life had about a 1 chance in 10 of dying during that first year of life. So that's the reason these early cemeteries are just full of infants. Contrast that with the infant mortality these days, it's about 1 in 5,000, markedly different. So you can see Lorito died in 1916, a couple of years earlier than her father did. And you can see down in the lower left, she was buried in the Grand Canyon, whatever that means. We don't know what that means, somewhere in the Grand Canyon, right? Maybe in what we regard as the cemetery now, maybe somewhere else. But if you were Christina burying your husband, do you think it would occur to you to put him next to the daughter that died 2 years before? Do you think that this site right here could represent Lorito Ramirez? Well, it's possible. We don't know that. It's just a supposition. the main point I want to make is I think there were burials going on in this area much earlier than we generally recognize. And that's a theme I'm going to come back to in a few minutes. So here's one of the reasons we actually have a cemetery at the South Rim. We know that you could bury anyone anywhere in the country you wanted to, as long as you could get them on the train. But the fact is, there were a lot of people already being buried in the cemetery, or all over the park. And the Park Service, being the orderly organization it was, it didn't really like that much. This is actually the grave of William Ashurst. He died in 1901 in the canyon, working a mining claim, one of his mining claims. He did something to trigger a landslide and got caught under an enormous boulder. And his body was found about a month later by his close friend and business partner, John Hance. Hance couldn't move the body, it was pinned, but he piled rocks on top of it to keep the scavengers away. And then sometime later, Niles Cameron, the older brother of Ralph Cameron, went down, recovered the remains, brought them up the Bright Angel Trail, and buried them here, right at the head of the Bright Angel Trail. And they stayed there for decades. As a matter of fact, they stayed there until 1937 when this photo was taken. This photo was taken just before this grave and Ashurst's remains were moved to the cemetery. Now, I once went out and tried to at least locate that tree. You can't see anything there now. It's either a parking lot or a bus stop or something else. It's been totally obliterated. So you really can't see any signs of this old burial. This burial, however, it's pretty easy to locate. This is where Olga and Charles Brandt were buried in 1922. This is close to the rim, a very rocky location. It was an expensive site to put in, took a lot of blasting. But Brandt was well off. He'd been the manager of El Tovar for years, an influential guy. And he had arranged to be buried in this location with the Forest Service prior to the appearance of the Park Service, of course, in 1919. So he had made prior arrangements to be buried here. I don't think the Park Service liked it much. There wasn't anything they could really do about it, given the prior arrangement and Brandt's influence. Here in the background, this is where their dog was buried, Razzle Dazzle. Now, if you're standing at this site and you turn and look at in the other direction, this is what you see. You kind of have to peer through the trees and look towards the horizon there, and you see that big eyesore sitting out there, right there. That's El Tovar. And this is what Brandt wanted. He wanted to be buried close to the rim, and you could see we're close to the rim, and within sight of El Tovar. And this is enough information to find that site right there if you're a little persistent. So here's another burial down by the river in 1922. Rhys Griffiths had a trail crew that he was supervising. They did some blasting, and Rhys got killed when a boulder rolled on top of him. Since he was already down by the river, they found this little alcove on the north side, just below the Black Bridge, and that's where they buried him. And it's pretty easy to find. It's right off the main trail. If you know it's there and you start looking for it. This is a plaque to Rhys up on the wall. And then this is kind of an interesting story about burials, inadvertent burials at the South Rim. So in 1924, the Park Service was constructing a new campground, and it was near the railroad tracks over by the Maswick Lodge. This isn't the Mather campground. This is an earlier campground. The Park Service went in there and they found 6 graves. They didn't know anything about them. They didn't know they'd been there. There were probably Hispanic workers from the railroad or their families. The remains and the graves were moved to the South Rim Cemetery. The Park Service made no attempt to identify anything about these people, whether they were adult or infants or anything. And they were just placed in unnamed graves. But the general feeling was that at least a couple of these people had died in the flu pandemic. Maybe all 6, maybe just 1 or 2. So the flu pandemic, we've already discussed Lorenzo Ramirez dying of the flu. Ralph Berry and Robert Bingham also died from the flu. John Hance died in the middle of the flu pandemic, but he didn't die of the flu. He died of an unrelated condition, endocarditis. But it's a little odd because in normal times, the flu kills the very young and the very old. This flu was killing perfectly healthy adults, and that was another reason it was causing a great deal of consternation. If we think worldwide, the influenza probably killed about 5% of the population worldwide. Of course, this came right at the end of World War I, the Great War, the so-called war to end all wars. We know that the battlefields of World War I were horribly bloody. I mean, tens of thousands of men were killed on the battlefield. But 10 times that number, 20 times that number died of the flu. And I think it's a little ironic that if we hadn't had the war, we may not have even had the flu. It was those war conditions that crammed all those young men into barracks and into troop ships that probably encouraged the pandemic. Of course, we called it the Spanish flu. Didn't have anything to do with Spain other than the fact that Spain didn't have any wartime censorship of their papers. They weren't involved in the war. Every place else censored the news. In this country, for example, it was regarded as unpatriotic and contrary to the war effort to talk very much about the flu. You could talk a little, but not very much. So some people think that the flu pandemic absolutely or originally started in that foreign country that we call Kansas. Maybe a Kansas pig farm would be a good candidate. Other people disagree with that. They say, oh, it started somewhere else. Now, the fact of the matter is that most people who caught the flu got over it. There were undoubtedly a group of asymptomatic people, a group that were mildly affected, then more seriously affected, and so on. But a small number of people developed longer-term consequences. Instead of getting over the flu, or shortly after getting over the flu, they developed Parkinson's-like syndrome, and some of them actually went into comas, sometimes comas for decades. And you've undoubtedly heard the story of Oliver Sacks, a young neurologist in 1950, treating some of these long-term coma patients with dopamine agonists and having them wake up. Of course, the movie Awakenings. Now, pandemics have always been with us and probably always will be with us. I propose that the Andes virus is a good candidate for our next pandemic or something very similar. There are probably a dozen other candidates. This is a hantavirus that lives in rodents in the Andes Mountains down in Argentina way. It's on rare occasions transmissible to humans. Oh, by the way, this thing on the left, this is just a little article from the New England Journal of Medicine about the Andes virus, came out last year in 2020. So that's what I'm taking this information from. But this Andes virus is on rare occasions transmissible to humans. usually when the human has had too close a contact with the rodents. What makes this virus unusual is that once a person catches it, they can then transmit it to other humans. That's very unusual for a hantavirus. And it has a 30% mortality. How'd you like COVID with a 30% mortality? So the Argentine Public Health Service really monitors for this. There have been several outbreaks of this over the years. They're scared to death of it getting into the general population. So when they detect an outbreak somewhere, they rush up teams and quarantine, do contact tracing, do everything they can to suppress the outbreak. We actually have our own hantavirus here in the Southwest. We call it Sinombre virus sometimes, or simply just hantavirus. And again, exposure to rodents, specifically the white-footed deer mouse. And when a person catches it, the rare times they do, it's not transmissible among humans. Not yet, but keep in mind, viruses mutate. Okay, enough scare talk about pandemics. Let's move on to some more interesting Grand Canyon history here. Look at this very nice historic photograph from 1895, according to the museum collection. I think the date is a little closer to 1916. My wife looks at this and says, oh, no, no, no. The women are dressed, it looks like 1900, but whatever the date is. This guy right here, this is Ralph Berry, named for Ralph Cameron, interestingly enough, but Ralph Berry, who died of the flu in 1919. This is his father, Pete Berry, one of the early pioneers in the Grand Canyon community and one of the early prospectors in the canyon. Had some claims down on Horseshoe Mesa and helped build the trail down from Grandview Point, and then later built a hotel at Grandview Point. When Pete's first wife ran off with a garment salesman, he eventually married this woman, Martha, who was a housekeeper in his hotel. And then this person over here is Martha's sister. And look at how nice this building looks. This was actually Ralph Berry's homestead. Looks like a very decent place to live. And look at these vines. I think that must be morning glories or something. So here's the cemetery. Here's where Ralph Berry was buried in 1909. And then you can see a little footer in front of him. And over to the left, that is the headstone for Martha Berry and her footer there. And then further to the left, out almost on the edge of the screen, that's where Pete Berry was eventually buried quite some time after his son. And here's Ralph Berry's death certificate. Of course, I can't pass this up. And you can see death was as follows: Spanish influenza and lobar pneumonia. And he had been sick for 11 days before he died. And I've forgotten if, oh yes, I wanted to mention that he was a farmer and a stock raiser. So here's another person who died from the flu, Robert Bingham. You can see on his headstone here, a forest ranger. So he came to the canyon before the Park Service showed up, and died of influenza in 1919. He was 26 years old. And here's another view of his headstone a little further away. This back here, this is actually the headstone for John Hance. And then look over here on the left. That's actually where William Ashurst was moved in 1937. So Ashurst died in 1901, much earlier than Hance, but Hance beat him to the cemetery. And then in the background, that's Ralph Berry's headstone, another view of Ralph Berry. So here, this is Robert Bingham in 1916. I just love this photo. I cobbed it from Parker Anderson's cemetery book. I like it so much. Look at this big, healthy guy. So in 1916, he was a Yale undergraduate and he played football. He was a halfback, and in 1916, the Yale actually won the championship. So Robert Bingham was a popular guy. But he ended up leaving Yale before he graduated, and he left for what was described as health reasons. So let's look at his, here, something before we get to his death certificate. This is a very nice historic photo from 1932. Here's Bingham's headstone right there. This guy right back here, that's Minor Tillotson, the person who drew up that cemetery map in 1923. Of course, now in 1932, he's park superintendent. And he's standing here next to a couple of football coaches from Yale. And then everyone else, they're all football players. So in 1932, the Yale football team was on their way to Los Angeles to play an exhibition game at the Olympics, which were being held at Los Angeles in 1932. And they stopped here to pay their respects to Bingham. They still remembered that award-winning year, 1916. So here's Bingham's death certificate. And you can see that he died of influenza, pneumonia, and then something that's crossed out. And let's move down here and look at that. So it says chronic nephritis, that is chronic kidney disease. So he left Yale probably because he had developed chronic kidney disease, and that collegiate environment may not have been the most healthy place for someone with kidney disease. So he moved west and of course ran into flu. So coming back to the cemetery map, we mentioned Lucia Marquez, how little we know about her. Here's another person we know very little about, F.E. Campbell or E.E. Campbell, something like that. Both these people, we don't know who they are. No death certificates. The modern map of the cemetery doesn't even show them buried. So even their burial has been lost. So I'm just going to list everyone here from the map that I want to talk about. So Lucia Marquez and Campbell, we just mentioned them. Lorenzo, we've talked about. John Hance, I don't talk much about Hance. He's well known. I like the stories that are more obscure. That's my interest. I prefer the story of Lorenzo. Now, the fact is, John Hance, there's a nice biography out on him written by Shane Murphy, well worth reading, but I'm not going to say anything more about him. So Ralph Berrien Bingham, we just discussed, died of the flu. Now we have some more people that we're going to go through. And I'm going to come back to one of those unnamed graves, or a candidate for one of those unnamed graves. Here's a death certificate for Baby Henderson. Baby Henderson died so fast that they didn't even get around to giving him a first name. And you can see he died in 1911. I meant to put that arrow up a little higher, but it's all the same. He died in 1911 and of a congenital heart lesion, died less than a day old. And down here in the lower left, buried somewhere in the Grand Canyon. Could that mean what we regard now as the cemetery? And I want to suggest to you that yes, it's entirely possible that people were being buried in that region as early as 1911, maybe earlier, who knows, but at least I have several death certificates from this period. This is an interesting site. This is a little piece of a Kaibab limestone, small stone. Quite honestly, I didn't even notice it the first couple times I went to the cemetery. My wife took a photo of it. I was looking at the photo one day at home, and I took a close look and I said, there's something written on that stone. Take a close look at that. It says ED something. Look in the, you can see where this is located, by the way. Notice the cemetery fence back there, the Shrine of the Ages in the background. So this is the EDC site. I don't think Tillotson saw that old inscription either, because I think he would have noted it on his map. And so just another view, perhaps a little closer. You can see an E, a D, and a very faint C. It's kind of fun to go out there and see if you can see it yourself. The light really has to be good, and many times it's easier to see on a photograph. Well, we actually know a little bit about the site, not a lot. If you go to the museum collection and start looking at the cemetery files, there is a file called EDC. It has a very, very brief note, and this is the entire note. A Mexican child who died about 1921. So we actually know a little bit about that. So this is the burial site of Lizzie Clausen, 1922. She was 58 years old when she died of pneumonia, kind of a common cause of death at the time. This is just a plain old piece of concrete, kind of a concrete pillar. This opening at the top, I think, probably held a wooden cross originally. I have no reason to say that other than just supposition. I've never seen a photograph of this site with a cross, but I have a sneaking suspicion that that's the case. We know a little bit more about Lizzie's husband. Here he is, Leo Clausen. He died sometime later, 1938, at the age of 79. This photo is from 1935, and it describes Leo as an AT, Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe special agent, whatever a special agent was. I look at this photograph and he looks like a conductor to me, so maybe that was a special agent, I don't know. So another site, the site where Cecil Dodd was buried in 1923, just 34 years old. Big shock to the Grand Canyon community. He was a popular guy. His wife was actually buried next to him decades later in 1957. She doesn't have a headstone. And there are several women, at least two other women in the cemetery in similar circumstances. Their husband died, the headstone was put up. They died decades later and no headstone. And I think it's a consequence of outliving everyone you're close to. So a close-up view of Cecil Dodd's headstone. This is a veteran stone. The American Legion ordered it from the Veterans Administration, and then the American Legion installed it. You can see New Mexico here on the stone. Cecil enlisted from New Mexico. That's what New Mexico means. And then you can see Wagoneer here. So he served in the war in the transportation unit, a unit that transported supplies and ammunition to frontline troops. When he died in 1923, a rumor got started that he had died of a war wound, kind of a romantic idea. Well, the only war wound he came back with from the war was a hernia. Schlepping around all the supplies gave him a hernia. And he went in for a hernia repair in 1923 down at St. Joseph's Hospital in Phoenix. And then a couple of days later, probably 3 or 4 after surgery, he went into acute kidney failure and died. Of course, we recognize that these days, not as death from a war wound, but as malpractice. He undoubtedly got an infection during surgery or shortly after, and died of organ failure. So this is Cecil Dodd's draft registration card. This is kind of interesting. You can see Cecil Dodd up here at the top. And here, rancher and farmer, very much like Ralph Berry. Of course, Cecil went off to fight in the war. Why Ralph wasn't drafted, I don't know. And then this is interesting. Cecil's homestead was 11 miles southwest of Grand Canyon Village. So if you're driving to the South Bass Trailhead, just before you get to the Havasupai Reservation, you'll pass a feature called Dodd Tank. And that's where Cecil Dodd's homestead was. And then here's a self-description. Cecil called himself tall, of medium build, dark blue eyes, dark brown hair. He claimed he wasn't bald, and he claimed that he had all his hands and legs and fingers and toes. So I've pretty much talked about everyone on the Tillotson map here. When Tillotson drew this map, of course, he had the idea that there would be improvements to the cemetery. And improvements did happen to the cemetery, but it took a long time coming, and for good reason. The cemetery wasn't the most important feature at the canyon. The canyon was in desperate need of good roads and trails and phone lines and buildings and all sorts of stuff. But eventually, we start seeing some improvements. And this is one of the early improvements, the cemetery gate. Tillotson became superintendent in 1927. And when he did, when he had the authority, he went and talked to the American Legion. And he said, how would you guys like to have a volunteer project for the community and build a cemetery gate? And they really liked that idea. And so Tillotson went to a park architect and said, draw me up some plans for a good gate that could be put together with volunteer labor. And these are the plans. And here's Tillotson's signature. And down here, you can see the date, 1928, January 1928. And this is the gate they built. And if you look over here at the right, that's a plaque that says built by the American Legion, 1928. So this was another project for the cemetery sometime later, 1935. Of course, the CCC came along at the beginning of the Depression, provided an enormous amount of labor in the park, building trails and putting in phone lines. And then in 1935, a small group of them was available to build a better fence. And here they are preparing the logs. As a matter of fact, if you look in the background back there, you can see the old fence right back there. And then likewise, another group of CCC men in 1938 put in the paths in the cemetery and surveyed the grounds. And as a matter of fact, there's that new fence, a nice rail fence in the background. Here's the cemetery map that was actually imposed on the cemetery in 1938. It looks very similar to the Tillotson map. It's a little different. This central section has this kind of artsy dip down here. You know, Tillotson, being an engineer, he liked everything nice and symmetric. If you just take this map and rotate it, put it on its side, and renumber stuff, you get the modern cemetery map. And all these sections on the interior, of course, have obviously been renumbered, but they're all just general sections. Section 11, still the Masonic section. Section 7, still the Catholic section. And 9, still the Veterans section. Now, like I say, this was imposed on the cemetery in 1938. There were already a few burials here. For instance, there was a 12-year-old girl buried in the Veterans section in 1935. and obviously didn't fit. And that's part of the reason why all these sections have never been taken all that seriously. There are a number of non-Masonic people buried in the Masonic section and non-Catholics in the Catholic section and so on. But at any rate, that was the original intent. Now, Section 1, Lot 1. This is a symbolically important site. This is where Tillotson was buried in 1955. Not in the Masonic section, mind you. He's outside the Masonic section. You can see the Masonic sign up there, but they buried him in this other location. So here's another photo of Tillotson. I can't tell whether he's frowning or smiling. Frowning because this tree got hit by lightning, hit his car, or whether he's happy that it didn't just smash his car flat. You know, Tillotson, in my estimation, is an admirable guy, but he suffered all the faults that engineers often suffer from. He was very proactive in terms of improvements in the park, but a time when the park needed to be improved. But for instance, when a trail got put in from Phantom Ranch to Clear Creek, he couldn't understand why some naturalists complained that they were going to put up a structure in Clear Creek for the hikers. He just couldn't see the point of that. And he always wanted to put a road down to Supai, but he could never get the money, fortunately. As a matter of fact, he briefly considered a plan to take all the Havasupai, move them to the Wallapai Reservation and expand the park. That didn't last long either. So here's another shot of Tillotson, same right hand on his hip there. In 1935, up on the Priya Plateau, he was out with a group of people who were surveying the surrounding country for possible inclusion in future national parks. All these plans, of course, got stymied by World War II. I haven't got any good reason to put this photo in, except that I like it. This is the Tillotson party leaving the Priya drainage to the East Bench. The first time I looked at this, I said, oh, they're almost at the top of Dominguez Pass here. I look at it now, I think, well, maybe it's a Spencer Trail. It's one or the other. I think it'd be a lot of fun to recreate this photo historically. So I probably need to hurry up a little bit. Just a comment, we've only talked about the early 20s. Over the years, there have been a lot of burials in the cemetery, and now in 2017, the cemetery was officially closed by the Park Service. So if you like these stories, there are plenty more in my book. I didn't write this book to make money, which is good because I've never made any money. I was interested in learning about the people buried in the cemetery. And there are just a ton of interesting stories. If you happen to look at this book, if you happen to find a mistake in particular, please drop me an email. I love hearing about mistakes. I hate to have them, but I love the possibility of correcting them. Okay, I am done. And I am going to stop sharing the screen here. Oop, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about those things. We're out of time. I'm going to stop share. And
That was great.
was it okay?
Yeah.
Did I go on for too long?
Not at all.
My wife kept giving me messages that how long I was taking. So I didn't want to run too far over 45 minutes. So
There are some wonderful questions here. And I'm gonna just run these down to you. The first question was pretty neat, which is from Jonathan Upchurch. How difficult is it to dig a grave in the cemetery?
yeah, that's a really good point.
Because
Part of
they
the
can't
reason
have
the
limestone.
cemetery,
Yeah,
part of the reason the cemetery is located where it is it was easy to dig a grave. unlike the Brant site, which was very difficult, it was much easier there than anywhere along the rim. And you wanted the cemetery located in a place that was easy to dig a grave and next to a road, so you could transport the body.
Okay, so do you think the location was chosen because the ground was easy to dig?
Yes, I do. I think, it was close to Grand Canyon Village, but not too close. And as a matter of fact, if you walk the road from Grand Canyon Village to the cemetery, it's, 3/4 of a mile or something. There's actually a nice trail just south of the road. But if you walk that and ask, where would I put a cemetery? If you look north of the road, it's all broken country. It's just a lousy spot to put a cemetery. South of the road is a little bit better, but it's kind of in a drainage. It's a little too steep. But by the time you get up to where the cemetery is, the ground suddenly opens north of the road, and it's nice. I think it was a natural place for burials. And like I say, I think people were buried there starting in 1911.
Okay. There's another question here that Rena Honan has asked about ground penetrating radar.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? Because didn't Grand Canyon National Park do that at the cemetery?
Yes, they did, and they have a very nice map based on ground penetrating radar, and it shows a number of very embarrassing things, like the headstones don't really correspond to a lot of the bodies, and there are burials under some of the paths, and just a number of extraneous bodies and no bodies in some location. It's a very, very interesting document. I cannot correlate what we see on the surface with what LiDAR saw underground. And so I've kind of given up the attempt. For instance, there was one burial site where we're not even certain there's a headstone there, but we're not even certain that the child was buried there. The death certificate actually says they were buried in Flagstaff. And I thought, well, maybe this would be a good spot to look at LiDAR and see if there's any body associated with that headstone. But there's nothing directly associated with the stone, but there are a couple of things close. It's very ambiguous. And that's the bottom line. I think the study was well worth doing for a whole variety of reasons, but it's hard to correlate the LiDAR studies with what you see on the surface. When you're standing at a gravesite, the body may not be right there.
And Mark had a question wanting to know about the sections, the section numbers 1 through 10. Is 10 the new section, or is it just where the last people that were interred are being interred because there's room there?
No, there were actually 11 sections, and
Okay.
They were all intended to be used simultaneously, and they were. And initially, they just scattered body, burials all over the place. Like I say, that 12-year-old girl who got buried in the veterans section, what we now call the veterans section. But there were plenty of things like that.
Okay.
Section 10 was initially called the indigent section. It was really intended for Native Americans. I think that's what Tillotson had in mind. I'm guessing, but there are plenty of all sorts of people buried in Section 10, in addition to a number of Havasupai.
Could you do me a huge favor and share your screen again and bring up the PowerPoint and go back to the drawing of the gate?
That's really an interesting drawing. Let's see if I can find it quickly. Oh, what did I just do?
Grab it and click on it. Click on the slider and go down. Yep, there you go. And now go down. That's it. That's it.
Okay,
Yep,
let's
yep,
see.
yep,
Where is
yep,
that? Let's go
yep.
down a little
Go on.
further, a little further, a little further, a little further.
There it
Yeah,
is.
here it is, right here.
Click on that. So,
Yeah.
okay, this is approved by Arthur Demaray. And Demaray is the acting director of the Park Service in 1928. You see that below Tillotson there?
Yes,
I was like,
yes.
wait, that's Art Demaray. That's, well, I digress. But I saw that. I went, holy cow, how cool is that?
Yeah, yeah. No, I had not noticed that. I think Demaray is actually buried in the same cemetery now. So
Really? Is he's in
how
the
cool
Grand
is
Canyon
that?
Cemetery? He's in the Grand Canyon Cemetery?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Demaray, you got. Yep.
Okay, very neat. And Haley noted that you showed the photo of Tillotson up on the steps there in the Paria. And she's thinking that there was an old route near the Spencer Trail. Where is Haley? You should just jump in and ask. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi. I was recently doing some research out in the Glen Canyon area, and I read about an old route at the very top of the Spencer Trail that doesn't really exist anymore, and it was called The Steps. And
Yeah, actually, I know where the steps are, and Cindy and I have
Yeah.
been down them. And they're actually a little bit away, not too far, but they drop
Okay.
into the other side of the Colorado River.
Oh,
okay, oh, so it's that one. Okay, so I was wondering if that might have been it, but
Well, that's a good thought. But the two trails that I know about that were known in Tillotson's days were the Spencer Trail and the Dominguez Trail. Of course, there's also a trail along the old telephone line. I've actually never done it, but I have friends who've done it.
oh, okay, got it.
super. Well,
Have we absolutely exhausted everyone now, or
No,
all
we
the?
we haven't. And what I want to do now is, if anyone has a question, please just unmute yourself and bring it on.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop share here.
Okay.
Hey, great presentation. This is Carrie. And I'm wondering about the air crash victims, like how many-
Yeah, a very interesting topic. And specifically, you're referring to the large headstone with, I've forgotten now, 31 names or something. So they represent the United Airlines crash, or the United Airlines victims. The TWA victims are buried in Citizen Cemetery in Flagstaff. For curious reasons, I always wondered why both groups weren't buried at the South Rim, but it was probably hard to accommodate all those victims in one location. So I've forgotten the exact numbers, but if my memory is correct, Tom Sulpizio will probably have these on the tip of his tongue. But I think there were 56 people who died in the United plane, counting passengers and crew. Might be somewhat less, I've forgotten. But there are only 31 names listed on that memorial for the United Airlines crash victims at the South Rim. And that's because the ones that aren't there, their bodies were actually recovered and sent home. And so only the unidentified people who died got put on that memorial stone, with two exceptions, but I don't know if we can go into all that. If you're interested enough, oh, here, did Tom just have a have a message, Tom Sulpizio? I missed it.
He does. He said the number was actually 58 individuals.
Right. Okay, good, good. And how many were on the stone? Only 31 or 32, like I say.
31.
31. Okay, good, good.
Two were actually identified, but because they were relatives of unidentified companions, they were
Right.
added out of respect and
Right.
family
Yeah,
wishes.
the families requested
Correct.
specifically.
Correct.
Tom Sulpizio, of course, has a relative from that crash, so that's he's an expert in that on that subject, and will involve you if this gets any more detailed about that monument.
So Kern, there's a couple more questions here. When did you say the cemetery was closed to new burials, and is it completely full?
No, it's not completely full. It was closed in 2017. It's still possible to get buried there if you have a close relative who's already in the cemetery, and if there's room in the lot. And there are several people who would qualify under that circumstance. I think so yes, it's closed as of 2017, but there are some rare exceptions, particularly if you have someone already buried there. There are actually a couple of reservations. One of the former governors of Arizona has a reservation to be buried in the cemetery. I don't know if that will be honored. I think it'll be a brave superintendent that turns them down, but we'll see what happens.
So would it take a brave superintendent to say, you know what, I'm going to enlarge this a little more, and we're going to keep letting people in that cemetery?
Yeah, I think it would. You know, the Park Service in recent years has never been happy with providing a cemetery. And like I say, in a very real sense, one wasn't really technically needed, except that burials were happening all over, contrary to the orderly behavior of the Park Service. Yeah, it's a very special place.
That's right. It really is a very special
Yeah.
place.
I think cremation has become so popular that I think there's perhaps less pressure now to be burying bodies in any case.
Yes. Yeah.
And, you know, you supposedly need official approval to scatter ashes in the Grand Canyon, but we know that there are plenty of people who do it unmonitored, and it's impossible to stop them.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is a good time to wrap things up. And I really want to thank Kern for your wonderful presentation tonight. And if you're not a member of the Grand Canyon Historical Society, you should be. I also wanted to mention that the next virtual outing is going to be like this one at 6 o'clock in the evening on the second Tuesday of December. And Kern's wife, Cindy Stafford, is going to present on the women behind the Powell expedition.
It'll be a lot more interesting talk. So just
Well, I'm not sure about that. We'll let the audience decide. And thank you again so much, everyone, for attending this meeting tonight. With that, I am going to stop the recording and bid everyone a wonderful evening. Thank you all so much for attending.
thanks a lot for listening. I hope I didn't go on too long.
There's a lot of people saying thank you, Kern. So this is really great.
Thank you, Kern.
Okay, we'll see you. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you for attending.
Good night, everybody.